Okay, well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us on today's Integrity Systems Company Stand By What You Sell webinar, especially for New South Wales. I'm Deanna Lush from Ag Communicators and I'm helping out with facilitation for this session. So today is all about helping you to understand the elements of Australia's red meat integrity system and providing you with practical tips so you can stand by what you sell. The webinar is hosted by Integrity Systems Company with support nationally from the peak industry councils. So that's Sheep Producers Australia, Cattle Council of Australia, and the Goat Industry Council of Australia. Also in New South Wales, we are supported by New South Wales Department of Primary Industries and New South Wales Farmers. We do have 650 registrations for this session, which makes it the largest one of the series so far. Now, a few housekeeping items before we get going. So we are running today's session as a webinar. So this means your microphones are muted and your cameras are also off. We do want to be very interactive though, so we welcome any questions you might have as we go through. We have the Zoom Q&A function turned on. So if you just move your cursor to the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Q&A button, or it might be at the top if you're on an iPad. Just click or tap on that one and type your questions in there. We'll answer them as we go through, and then we'll have a general Q&A at the end of the webinar. Now, if we have a significant tech issue where you can't see or hear us anymore, we'll just close the meeting off and send a new invite within 10 minutes and we'll pick up where we left off. But fingers crossed, we are all good with the IT and the tech today. Now, to introduce who we have on today's session. So our presenter is Kathleen Allen, and Kathleen is Communications and Evaluation Manager for ISC. She's responsible for the rollout of communication and stakeholder engagement activities right across the organisation. She is also based on a livestock property at Yass in New South Wales. So in addition to her ISC role, she is definitely speaking from practical experience when it comes to putting the integrity system into practice on her farm. We also have Damon Holmes, and Damon is ISC's Integrity Program Manager. He's originally from a cattle property in central Queensland, where they've been long-term suppliers direct to Woolworths. He's now based in Sydney, working in traceability and food safety and overseeing the integrity system programs. We also have the key ISC product managers on the call today. So that's Emily Duncanson, who manages the ENVD, Lisa Barrios, who manages the Livestock Production Assurance Program, or LPA, and Dr. Don Colantonio, who manages the Livestock or National Livestock Identification System, or NLIS. We also have Kevin Keys, who is ISC's Customer Experience Manager, and Joe Gangemi, who is Communications Officer for ISC as well. So we have a lot of experienced people on the call today, or the ISC Brains Trust, as I like to call them. Lots of practical experience in putting the integrity system into practice. So if you have questions, today is the day to ask them. Now from New South Wales, we have Lisa Burrows, who is Leader of Traceability in New South Wales DPI, and Jodie Deans, who is a Policy Director in New South Wales Farmers. So both Lisa and Jodie will be able to answer any state-based questions related to the integrity system. So it's great to have them on the call today. Now, this session will be recorded and we'll circulate the link in an email to you in the next 24 hours, along with some resources just to help you guide your use of the integrity system programs. So definitely keep an eye out for that one. We also have a short evaluation link at the end of the presentation. We just want to get your feedback and just understand whether this type of session is the best way that we can get updates to you. So on that note, that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Kathleen to get the presentation started.
Thanks very much, Deanna, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for our Stand By What You Sell webinar. And welcome to the ISC team and our New South Wales colleagues who have joined us this afternoon as well. And I do hope those of you that were in need of a bit of rain enjoyed some rain over the last couple of days, and those that you that are still waiting, I hope it's on your way very soon. But just to, and I do apologise for the slight delay. We had a little technical glitch here in Yass, but hopefully we sorted that out now. But Just to very briefly, the agenda for today, we're going to talk through the role of the Integrity Systems Company, the importance of the red meat integrity system to Australia's livestock sector. We'll go through the two key integrity system programs, being Livestock Production Assurance and the National Livestock Identification System. We'll then talk about the changes to the national vendor declarations that have been rolled out this year, introduce you to or give you the latest on the faster and easier ENVD platform, and then we'll certainly throughout today's webinar give you some integrity insights and some practical tips, and in particular we'll show you how you can bring all your integrity accounts in the one place using MyMLA. So just to start off with, I guess, let's have a quick look at the industry overview and the roles and responsibilities of the different organisations that make up the Australian red meat sector. And Integrity Systems Company is a subsidiary of Meat and Livestock Australia, which is a service provider to the industry. So both MLA and ISC provide industry services and deliver key programs on behalf of the industry. Now, the organisations in the top row there, they're focused on policy and strategy, and they're often referred to as our peak industry councils. So they advocate on behalf of producers to not only decision makers, so at the government level, but they also provide, I guess, oversight and guidance to those industry service providers, which are there on the bottom row. Now, all these organisations have separate roles and responsibilities, but absolutely they all work together to support the future sustainability of the industry. Now, a little bit about Meat and Livestock Australia. So MLA is the research, development and adoption and marketing organisation for the Australian red meat sector. Now, they do that by collaborating with the Australian government and the wider red meat industry. And we do that through investing in initiatives that contribute to not only producer profitability, but also sustainability and global competitiveness. And the way that that actually occurs is that MLA invests those transaction levies. So every time sheep, cattle and goats are sold, there is a transaction levy that is paid. That levy is then matched with Australian government funds up to a certain point, up to a cap, and then that money is invested in a series of initiatives by MLA on behalf of producers. So Integrity Systems Company, we, as I said, is a fully owned subsidiary of Meat and Livestock Australia, and we are responsible for managing and delivering Australia's red meat integrity system. Now, it's this system that underpins consumer confidence in on-farm production of Australian red meat and covers both an on-farm assurance component through the Livestock Production Assurance Program, or LPA, and then identification and traceability through the National Livestock Identification System. Now, ISC, or Integrity Systems Company, works collaboratively with government and industry to deliver these world-leading traceability and assurance programs, and these are the foundations of the Australian red meat integrity system. So, the red meat integrity system, delivered by Integrity Systems Company, ensures that Australian red meat is safe to eat and fully traceable. It provides on-farm assurance, animal identification and traceability from paddock to plate, and it underpins the Australian livestock selling system, giving confidence to buyers, retailers and consumers around the world. So just to put all of this into context as to why it's so important that we have a red meat integrity system, well, the Australian red meat industry is worth $28 billion. It employs 400,000 people across 80,000 businesses and delivers product to 100 global markets all around the world. So ours is a very large, very serious and important industry, and there are thousands of people who depend on our industry for their livelihoods and for their food security and protein requirements. That's both here in Australia but also all around the world. And the confidence that consumers have in our product is based on traceability throughout the supply chain, which provides accountability right back to the farm where the animal has been raised, and production to an assessed standard. So as a first world country, we often take it for granted that our food is produced both safely and ethically. However, this is definitely not the case in every country. And when you are selling food to international markets, and the majority of Australian red meat does go overseas, transparent, rigorous production systems that require audited record keeping on farm are absolutely essential. international buyers and domestic and international consumers require that these systems are in place. Now, we've got some examples on the slide there where there have been issues such as mad cow disease, African swine fever, foot and mouth disease all around the world. And it's these sorts of risks to our farms and to our consumers that we absolutely want to avoid here in Australia. And these types of issues just highlight again why the red meat integrity system is so important, because it protects our industry prosperity, our market access and our competitive advantage, and that's linked to our reputation for providing that safe, high quality food. It supports premium prices that we enjoy as livestock producers, and it also supports the positive perception of our product, particularly overseas. And it ensures that Australia's reputation as a clean, green supplier is maintained. Now, whilst absolutely there are multiple producers and many properties of varying sizes that produce livestock around Australia, the integrity system really is about delivering one measure of quality through one integrity system. And I guess the key message here is that we all have a role, regardless of the size of our property, the number of livestock we produce, or even where we are in that supply chain. We all have a role to play to ensure that we stand by what we sell. Now, I realise that we do have varying levels of experience on the webinar, so just as a quick refresher, we will provide some more detail about the two programs which work together to underpin our industry's food safety and traceability on farm. And these are the LPA, or the Livestock Production Assurance Program, and it's all about on-farm assurance, covering on-farm management of food safety, animal welfare and biosecurity risks. It's the tick of assurance for your product from producer through to consumer, and it demonstrates the professionalism of the industry and underpins market access for Australian red meat around the world. NLIS, on the other hand, or the National Livestock Identification System, is all about identification and traceability. It tracks the location of every animal throughout its life. It's mandatory for producers and endorsed by major producer, feedlot, agent, sale yard and processor bodies. And it's underpinned by state and territory legislation and enhances the Australia's ability to track livestock during either disease or food safety incidents. Now, there are three other elements to the red meat integrity system which are really important, and they are the property identification code, the national vendor declaration, and then record keeping. Now, PICS, or the Property Identification Code, is the central component of the two programs. It's required for registration with both LPA and NLIS. Now, PICS are managed independently by the State and Territory Departments of Agriculture, and incorporation into LPA and NLIS of the PIC is the only way that traceability and food safety can be managed at a truly national level. Now, for an industry that exports a really high proportion of its product overseas, the assurance of a strong and effective national system is paramount. So if you're an overseas consumer of Australian red meat, you don't necessarily need to know or care which state the product came from. All you need to know that it's from Brand Australia or Team Australia. So our national system is really important. So we've talked there a little about the programs that make up the red meat integrity system, but what does that actually mean for you as producers or advisors to producers on farm? So livestock production assurance, so LPA accredited producers commit to carrying out on-farm practices that support the integrity of the entire system. So to do that, they sign up to managing their property and livestock according to 7 standards which make up the Livestock Production Assurance Program. And then this is verified when producers sign those national vendor declarations for any movements of livestock. Now, the 7 elements that make up LPA are property risk assessments. So that's the mapping and the identification of risks on that property, such as cattle dips, lead depots and the like. The second is around safe and responsible treatments of animals. The third is stock foods, fodder crops, grain and pasture treatments. The fourth is preparation for dispatch of livestock. So when livestock are being moved, are they being moved according to best practice and appropriate standards and things like the Fit to Load guide. The fifth element is livestock transactions and movements, and that's where the LPA particularly intersects with the National Livestock Identification System and having the appropriate documentation in place. And then the sixth element is managing any biosecurity risks on farm, and that includes having a biosecurity plan. And the 7th is around animal welfare. So from an NLIS point of view, so the National Livestock Identification System, what does that actually look like on your farm? So NLIS combines 3 key elements that enable the lifetime traceability of livestock. The first is that all livestock are identified by a visual or electronic ear tag or device. The second is that all physical locations are identified by means of that property identification code, or the PIC. And the third is that all livestock location data and movements are recorded in a central database, and that database is the NLIS database. And the third component, so when animals are transferred between PICs, that's when the LPA and the NLIS programs come together through the form of a National Vendor Declaration. So what does an NVD actually mean on farm? Well, an NVD brings together all the on-farm assurance, identification and traceability details, and it's the basis for ensuring that safe and traceable food product. So the NVD captures the food safety information on every animal, every time it moves from property to a processor or to a sale yard. And the NVD also provides history of the livestock, provides evidence, of the livestock history and any on-farm practices. So the link back to the LPA when transferring those livestock through the value chain. And you can stand by what you sell by making sure that every time you complete an NVD that it's clear, correct and complete. Or alternatively, you can use the eNVD for a faster and easier way to manage your consignments. And we're going to talk through now a couple of changes to the NVD that have been rolled out and are being continually rolled out over the course of 2020. And there's 3 key changes there for this year, and that's a change to the NVD versions for all species, the release of the new eNVD system, and the decommissioning of the EDEC platform. Now, these changes collectively will provide an easier, more efficient and cost-effective system for producers and stakeholders in the supply chain to interact with the integrity system. This suite of changes also aligns with the industry goal of ensuring that the integrity system of the future is simple to use, is valued by industry and trusted by consumers. Now, a review of all current or previous versions of the National Vendor Declaration by SafeMeat in 2019, which is the organisation that's represented by governments, producers and service providers in 2019, recommended that a number of changes be made, and that's resulted in the development of updated versions of the LPA for all species. And we'll go through those in a little bit more detail now. So new versions of LPA NVDs for all species became available on the 1st of July this year, and they are identified by version 0720, and you can see them highlighted there on the slide. Now, the previous versions of NVDs will continue to be accepted up until the 31st of December this year. However, from the 1st of January 2021, only the updated versions of all the NVDs will be accepted for all species. Now, just a note there that under MLA's Accelerated Adoption Initiative, there is no cost for NVD books up until the 1st of July 2021. So what do those actual changes look like on the new NVDs? So on the sheep NVD, we now have the inclusion of the number of electronic devices in the consignment on the NVD. Now this caters for the mandatory use of EID in Victoria and increasing use in other states, particularly for the seed stock industry. We also have the inclusion of a destination PIC. Now, this is actually mandatory in WA and Tasmania, but it is optional for other states. However, we would certainly encourage you to start to include the destination PIC on your NVDs. It makes completing your NLIS transfers a lot easier if you have that PIC detail available, and certainly enhances the lifetime traceability of those animals. Now, as I said, we've got a couple of insights and some practical tips during today's webinar. So how do you find the destination PIC so that you can enter it on the NVD? Conscious that we don't all have that just in our the back of our minds, but there's a couple of ways that you can do that. You can ask your agent or your buyer before you're loading at the yards and completing your NVD. You can search the NLIS database, or if you are using the ENVD, you can use the search function on the ENVD system, which is really quite easy to use. Now, just a little bit of a note there, the difference between consignees and destination. Just be careful because these can actually be different. So, for example, if you are selling sheep, cattle or goats at a sale yard, the consignee will actually be your agent. However, the destination and the destination pick will actually be the sale yard. So just take a bit of care when filling out your NVD to make sure you've got the consignee and the destination details are correct. And the other key change for the NVD for this year is removal of the agent's declaration section. So this was previously Part C. Now, if you would like to order copies of the NVD, the new NVD, you can do that a couple of ways. You can visit the ISC website, which is listed there, and we'll circulate these links. You can access the NVD section through the LPA Service Centre, or alternatively, you can contact the ISC help desk, and the number's there on the screen. And the third in the, I guess, the suite of changes for the NVD this year is the decommissioning of the EDEC platform. And what this actually looks like in practice is that from the 30th of April this year, you're no longer able to purchase tokens for the EDEC. Between April and up until the 31st of December this year, any tokens that have previously been purchased can continue to be used. However, from the 31st of December this year, access to the EDEC platform will cease. Now, the new ENVD covers all information that the EDEC does, but certainly in a much more user-friendly and intuitive way. And running a single digital system does present a significant cost and time saving to the industry.
Kathleen, I'm just going to take a minute to hop in there and just remind people that we have the Q&A open down the bottom. Just click on that one and put your questions in there. Don't wait till the end because we don't want to run out of time to answer any questions that you might have. We're going to answer them as we go through. Now, just a reminder, from New South Wales DPI, Lisa's on the line to be able to answer any questions about PICs and movement requirements in New South Wales. And then from ISC, we've got all the team. Damon has oversight over the integrity programs as a whole. And we've got Don, Lisa Barrios and Emily who manage the NLIS, LPA and ENVD specifically. So lots of people on the line to answer your questions. So feel free to start popping them in there now. Back to you, Kathleen.
Thanks very much, Dee. So I guess the question for everybody now is, can you stand by what you sell? And I guess we've highlighted a little bit about the changes that have been rolled out over the course of 2020, and we've also given you a summary of the different programs that make up that red meat integrity system. But from here, ISC is working with a range of industry influencers and producers right across Australia to build awareness and knowledge and skills in the LPA and the NLIS, because we absolutely want to help industry to stand by what it sells. So part of our strategy is to communicate a range of practical tips on how producers can meet their requirements as part of the Australian red meat integrity system. So just to recap, the red meat integrity system, it's all connected. The system is made up of two core functions, that being on-farm assurance and identification and traceability. On-farm assurance comes through the Livestock Production Assurance Program, and then the ID and traceability through the NLIS program. Those programs have their own individual requirements, but they're not unique and they're not discrete. And the two programs do absolutely intersect in three key areas, and they are through the Property Identification Code, through the National Vendor Declaration, and then through record keeping. So for the remainder of the webinar, I guess it's all about providing you with those practical tips and things that you can do to meet your requirements for each of those programs, but then more importantly, meet those requirements for the whole overarching system and therefore be able to stand by what you sell. So what actually do producers and advisors of producers need to do and need to be aware of as part of livestock production assurance? Well, there's a couple of things you can do. The first is that you can keep your online LPA account details up to date. You need to maintain your LPA accreditation, and this includes doing the online learning and assessment to understand LPA's requirements for livestock and property management, and renewing your accreditation every 3 years. Accreditation gives you more options for marketing your livestock and means that you can access those LPA national vendor declarations for all livestock movement between PICs. You need to manage your livestock and your property in line with those 7 LPA on-farm standards that I talked about earlier. You need to maintain thorough and accurate records as evidence of livestock history and on-farm practices. And you need to be prepared to undergo an audit if requested. So LPA is an audited accreditation. So as a livestock producer, you agree to complete an audit when asked. And this provides that accountability from paddock to plate for the entire industry. So NLIS, our other key program that provides that identification and traceability component. What do you need to do? You need to register and have an NLIS account and keep that account details up to date. You need to order and use NLIS tags as identifiers for every animal you own on your pick. Now, the required tag type differs between states and territories a little, but every animal must be tagged with an accredited NLIS device and can't be moved to another pick without one, including to another farm, feedlot, or sale yard or processor. You need to record movements of livestock in the NLIS database. Livestock transfers between picks must be recorded by transferring the tags in the NLIS database, and the person receiving the livestock is responsible for completing the transfer. Now, the time frames for property to property transfers vary, so it's best to check what is required with your states, and we can clarify that with Lisa at the end of the call. All producers need to regularly check their own records against the database to ensure that transfers have been completed. And this is really important if you are relying on someone else to make the transfer, so you need to check that this has actually happened. So quite often and throughout Australia, sale yards, for example, manage the transfers post-sale. Also, there's a lot of livestock agents do transfers, but it's always the responsibility and the accountability lies with the producer and lies with you as the receiver of the livestock. So you need to make sure that that's actually occurring. And it's recommended that you do a pick reconciliation every year to ensure that the NLIS database is an accurate record of devices and livestock that are on your property. This will ensure that lifetime livestock traceability is in place, and that from time to time the database actually can issue an automated email if differences or discrepancies occur. So you may have received an email if you sent animals into the sale yards, for example, been one without a tag, you may have got a notification from NLIS or a warning. So it's really important that if you do receive those emails that you follow those up, and you can do that through the database. And doing a pick reconciliation became particularly important over the course of last summer following the bushfires and things like that. It's always good to make sure that you've got your database as accurate and as up to date as possible. Producers need to remember that completing those livestock transfers on the database is also an auditable requirement of LPA, and that auditors will review your NVDs, your ENVDs and your NLIS transfers. So that brings us to the national vendor decks. Well, what do you actually need to do as producers to make sure that you're doing a bit in terms of the NVD? You need to maintain your LPA accreditation first and foremost so that you can continue to access LPA NVDs. NVDs are a legal document, and they are your declaration that you have met the requirements of the program, and that includes all 7 on-farm elements that make up LPA. This declaration is married to the livestock's lifetime traceability when the transfer is completed on the database. Assurance and traceability need to go hand in hand so that our customers and consumers can remain confident in our integrity system, and therefore our red meat and our Australian livestock production. When you tick boxes on your LPA NVD, you are declaring that your on-farm practices meet those LPA requirements and therefore our customers' expectations. A tick on an NVD must be backed up by accurate farm records, and this is your pledge that the meat from your farm has been produced safely, ethically, and meets biosecurity requirements, and it means that you stand by what you sell. You also need to file your completed NVDs in case of an audit, and again, NLIS transfers are part of those LPA audits because consumer confidence in the system relies on that assurance and that traceability being linked. So make sure you complete your NVDs properly and make sure that the NLIS transfer is done and that you reference that NVD number so that you're doing your part to keep the system strong. So I guess the biggest tip to ensure that everyone can stand by what they sell is to make sure that every NVD is filled out so that it is clear, correct and complete. Now, there is a whole page of tips on how to complete the NVD as part of the LPA NVD book. So those of you that are using the hard copy book, you can still grab this handy reference guide in there. It's also available on the website, and you'll see it more and more through signage and things over the next couple of months as well. But we're just going to focus today on a couple of areas where we sometimes need a bit of help. Now, the questions in Part A of the National Vendor Declaration are often where we need a bit of a hand. Now, these questions are about the animal's history, and this information is really crucial for food safety and market access. So the key here is to stay on the safe side, and if in doubt, tick yes. So on the cattle NVD, we have a question around hormonal growth promotants, or HGPs. Now, it's important to note that an increasing number of markets will not accept beef or beef products that are treated with hormonal growth promotants. So answering this question correctly is vital to protecting Australia's access to those markets. So on the cattle NVD, you must declare if cattle have ever been treated with HGPs in their lifetime. And if in doubt, tick yes. And a bit of a tip there, and you'll pick this up if you've done the LPA learning. Don't forget that cattle treated with HGPs must be identified by a triangular ear punch. So if you're using HGPs, make sure you use that ear punch, or if you've purchased cattle in and you know that they've got that ear punch, well, when it comes to filling out your NVD, you know that they have been treated with a HGP over the course of their lifetime. On the sheep NVD, it's really important that you check your records so that you can accurately answer the question about the scabby mouth vaccination. Now, this is one of my favourites. This is question 3. So this is about the ownership history of the animals within the consignment. So if you have bred the livestock, you can tick yes. If you didn't breed the livestock, you've obviously purchased them in, so the answer is no. You haven't owned those animals since birth. If you've purchased one or more of the animals in the consignment, you need to tick no, and then you need to indicate the most recent date of purchase. Now, of particular importance here, you can't tick yes and no, and you can't tick more than one option for the length of time that you've owned those animals. So just a reminder that you need to be really conservative here, you need to be accurate, and you need to tick the most recent date of purchase for the whole consignment, even if the consignment contains animals with a mixed history. If you can't be certain of the vaccination status or treatment withholding periods or what the animals have been fed, again, you need to play it safe. You need to declare the risk and tick yes. And for all questions, you need to tick yes or no and not both. And it's always a good idea to check your records to be certain. Again, check your records to see that all animals have not been fed restricted animal material products. And this includes meat and offal, animal fats, blood, meat, blood and bone meals. With veterinary or chemical treatments, you need to check whether the livestock are within withholding periods or export slaughter intervals. You can do that by checking the label on the product that you've used, or for export slaughter intervals, you can go to the APVMA website, and we'll share that link with you in the post-webinar materials we send out tomorrow. And just a note there that quite often withholding periods and ESIs are not the same. Again, the question around what the animals have been fed, again, check your records to see if the livestock in the consignment have consumed any material that was still within a withholding period. Or if you're not sure, you can apply a default withholding period of 60 days. And the final step for Part A is the declaration, and this is your declaration and guarantee that you've met all those LPA requirements and that the NVD is complete and correct and that the animals have not had access to any restricted animal material. Don't forget, the LPA NVDs are a legal document and a part of your LPA record keeping, and so therefore can be audited. And Part B of the National Vendor Deck is the part to be completed by the livestock carrier. And the tip here, don't let the truckie leave without filling in this section, so therefore you can make sure that you've got your copy on hand as well. Just a final note about the NVDs, again about mixed consignments. Now you can divide them into groups based on their history and do more than one NVD if you like, but only as long as you can identify those animals and separate them at the other end, either at the sale yards or the processing plant. So if you do have a mixed consignment and you can't identify and separate them, then you absolutely need to take that really risk conservative approach, and you need to be quite clear, particularly in terms of the ownership and history of those animals. And of course, if you would like to, and we would encourage you all to take on the new ENVD. So the new mobile-friendly and very user-centric ENVD system has been developed and was launched at the end of March this year. It was based on feedback that we've sought since the initial launch of the ENVD back in 2017. Now, the faster, easier ENVD is available to all LPA accredited producers and others in the supply chain, and it's more accurate than paper forms. It ensures the latest version of the NVD is always being used and therefore will meet market requirements. It reduces time and duplication spent completing the various livestock assurance and health declarations that you will need to complete, and you can do that by selecting the different forms that you would like to complete when you first log in. You enter that information only once and then it pops out all those forms for you. It reduces the cost of storing and retrieving historical consignments for auditing, reporting and admin purposes. And again, this became very evident, particularly around the bushfires, as a number of producers lost all their records because they lost all their NBD books. You don't need to wait for new NBD books to arrive, and others within the supply chain can log in and view consignments, including receivers of livestock. Now, the ENVD is not just an NVD, as I said, it's a system for completing all your consignment paperwork digitally, and that includes those livestock assurance and health declarations. And you can access the new ENVD system by logging in to the LPA Service Centre using your LPA credentials, so your LPA, your PIC, your LPA user ID and password. So why is this version of the ENVD better than previous versions? Well, we undertook a very extensive consultation process with supply chain stakeholders. It underwent rigorous testing, including by numerous processors and the feedlot sector. There's a number of features which also make it a lot better this time. So it's print at any time, even when the NVD is incomplete. There's unlimited space for livestock descriptions. You can draw your signature or brand using a touchscreen device or mouse, so you don't need to scan a signed copy and then try and find that and upload it to the NVD. And there's a number of new features and enhancements which are continuously being released in response to feedback that we're receiving all the time. So as I said, there's a number of ongoing updates to the ENVD system, and just a couple that are listed there. Since it was released back at the end of March, there's now a mixed sex option for sheep, lamb and goat consignments, as well as a cow and calf sex option in the consignment details section. It incorporates the new version 0720 of the NVD. Look and feel of the movement information page has been improved, and then there's been a number of performance issues have been resolved. A couple of things coming up just to highlight, but there are many things in the pipeline. So the new cattle health declaration and MSA form versions will also be incorporated into the new platform. There's also a practice consignment or for first-time users and for training of your staff, as well as a number of bug fixes. And the insight there is that we are continuously updating the ENVD to ensure that it meets expectations and gives everybody a really great experience. So the updates are listed on the website, but you can absolutely email us your feedback at any time. And so for the last part of the webinar, I'm just going to go through some really practical insights for you across a range of programs to help you meet your requirements as part of the integrity program, and then overall be able to stand by what you sell. So from an LPA NVD, for example, tips for filling it out on the go: fill out as much as you can before going to the yard so that you don't get caught short or you drop it in the mud or something like that. Don't get caught short. Make sure you order your new book as early as you can, or otherwise transition across to the ENVD. Keep your LPA records up to date so that the information that you need is ready to go and at hand. Make sure you file the NVD and keep it as part of your record keeping in case of an audit, and check the NLIS database to ensure that transfers have occurred. From an NLIS point of view, and we've talked a lot about checking the database and transfers and doing PIC reconciliations, if you need help navigating the NLIS database, we've got a series of detailed tech tips available, and stay tuned. We're actually in the process of developing a whole heap of really intuitive how-to guides that will be available on the website as well. So again, that insight there, making sure that the database, checking the database, sorry, whenever transfer is being completed, and ensuring that the numbers are actually correct, because it can save a lot of time rather than correcting mistakes later on. Another NLIS integrity insight there, well, what actually is an early warning status? So a number of you may have heard about an early warning status. Early warning basically is a status within the NLIS database that's automatically assigned to a property or a PIC carrying high-risk animals. Now, while it doesn't identify specific animals, it does identify the property. It does help monitor and manage biosecurity risks for your farm and food safety along the supply chain, and it's really useful for both buyers and sellers, and it helps you make informed decisions if you're purchasing livestock. Now, the statuses are listed on the NLIS database, and there is a fact sheet available. There's a screenshot there, and we'll make sure that we send that fact sheet around in tomorrow's post-webinar email. But again, it's all about just providing you with information that will help inform your decisions before purchasing or selling livestock. We've talked a lot today about record keeping and how important it is. It's a good idea to align that record keeping to those 7 LPA standards. Now, we've got some templates and some handy guides on the website. You can download them for free from the ISC website, or you can get a free hard copy if you would like. But there's templates, and there's also some record keeping checklists across those 7 different elements of the LPA program, of which you're required to manage your livestock and property and therefore keep those records. Some practical tips for record keeping. So, I mean, there is no perfect formula for record keeping. There certainly are some very sophisticated decision support tools and apps out there. There's also nothing wrong with an Excel spreadsheet if that works for you, or a good old-fashioned Elders paddock book, whatever works for you. But there are just a couple of ideas that might make things a little bit easier. You can ask your supplier to add the AgChem vet product batch number and expiry date to the invoice for your livestock treatment records. So you've got a record of that, because you do, as part of LPA, but also as part of your chemical use records, need to keep records of those details. Use your phone. Everyone's got a smartphone these days. Take photos. They're date stamped. You can easily put them up into the cloud. Download them into documents as well to keep a record of animals that you might have treated, batch numbers and things like that. And another tip there, when purchasing fodder, so for example hay or grain, doesn't apply to commercially produced pellets, for example, download a copy of the commodity vendor declaration from the Integrity Systems Company website, ask the supplier to fill it in, so then when you get to that question on the NBD, you know the details of any treatments of that fodder. Also, might help you in terms of managing those food safety risks. But a tip around biosecurity risks, if you are purchasing in fodder, just keep an eye on or quarantine where you are feeding out that product, so that you can keep an eye on those surprise weeds that might up the following spring. We quite often get asked what's involved in an audit. So I guess the key message here is don't panic. You'll be contacted and you'll be offered checklists and support around doing an audit, and we could certainly do a whole webinar series on audits. So if that's something that you're interested in, please do let us know. But don't panic. Audits are about identifying areas for practical on-farm improvement. Your LPA records will be reviewed by an auditor as well as your NVDs and your NLIS transfers. So it's really important that you make sure they're accurate and up to date, but that the auditors will give you some tips. And again, there's another integrity insight there, that did you know that you actually need a copy of the Australian Animal Welfare Standards and Guidelines on hand for your LPA audit as part of the LPA requirements? So you don't need a hard copy of it, because you could keep a door open with this. It's quite wordy. Download it and save it to your favourites, and make sure that all your team members have access to it, and you'll meet those requirements. So we've gone through a fair bit of information today, conscious of the time. We did start a little bit late, but just we do have a whole range of resources available, and I would encourage you to reach out and use those. We have Integrity Systems Company website, which is now a bit of a one-stop shop or a portal for all things integrity, and particularly around a whole heap of FAQs, and it's got a really good search function as well. We have our regular monthly e-newsletter, Integrity Matters, which I hope you all receive. If you don't, please, you can subscribe on the website. We'll provide you a link to that tomorrow as well, and that provides all the latest news and information and changes from Integrity Systems Company. We're on all the usual social and digital platforms, Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. However, very conscious that we don't put all our eggs into the online basket, so we absolutely have a range of hard copy products which you're able to order, and you'll see more and more of this as we roll out a couple of big programs in the coming months. We have videos in terms of how to fill out the NVD, how to start to use the eNVD, lots of how-to animations, LPA learning guides for each of the different elements, FAQs, fact sheets, and those templates that I talked about. And if you really are stuck and do need some help, then absolutely you can reach out to the ISC help desk either over email or you can give them a call. Now, one final plug, we do have the program Livestock Data Link. Now, Livestock Data Link is a great program that provides real-time data based on your carcass performance, and it provides that information direct to you as a producer through analytics and reporting. Therefore, it can help you make better decisions on farm based on accurate information from your consignments that you're selling through to processing plants, and that therefore helps you improve the bottom line, both yourselves and the processor. Now, there are 4 modules within the Livestock Data Link program, and they are carcass compliance, animal disease and defects, breeder information for beef cattle, and then you can get predictive lean meat yield percentages there. So it's a great little dashboard. Again, it's very targeted information, and I would encourage you to have a look at Livestock Data Link. Again, if you would like some more information, check out our website to start with, but we can certainly do add to the series and do a webinar around LDL if you would like. And then finally, if getting all your integrity systems and integrity accounts online is a little bit overwhelming, which I do understand that it is, and I've been through this myself, as have many of my colleagues on the call as well, I would encourage you to sign up to MyMLA. Now, MyMLA does give you the ability to link all your integrity accounts, so your NLIS, your LPA, as well as MSA and Livestock Data Link in the one place. So you therefore only need one account, one email address and one password. You're not having to flick through your wallet and look through bits of paper and all the rest of it to try and remember different account details and passwords. It does that for you in a customized dashboard. It also provides targeted information such as a 7-day weather forecast, information from the MLA prices and markets team based on your production type and your location, as well as information on nearby events, industry news and information, and relevant research and tools. So it gives you the ability to customise the information that you want to see and hear about from MLA, as well as linking all those accounts, so you've only got to log in the once. So if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to give MyMLA a go. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. Dee, over to you. I can see that the Q&A function and the chat function is going off, so happy to use the remaining time for some questions if we have them.
Awesome. Thank you, Kathleen. Virtual round of applause for you. So much good information and so many practical tips in there. Yes, we have been getting a flood of really, really great questions. So a shout out to everyone on the call for keeping all of our panelists flat out during the presentation. Now, before we go to the questions, I just want to mention the evaluation link. So we would really love your feedback on whether this type of session, this time of day, etc., is the best time and the best method to be getting updates to you. So we're just going to post a little survey link in the chat box down the bottom, so next to that Q&A button. If you could click on that, I promise it only takes a couple of minutes, and we would really, really value your feedback as we move forward. Now, questions. So I think perhaps we'll start with Lisa Burrows from New South Wales DPI. Just a few state-based questions specifically, Lisa. So firstly, pre-question that we got in the registration. So how many years do we need to keep the NVD duplicates on file for in New South Wales?
Thanks, Deanna. Generally, it's 7 years.
7 years, easy one. Good, good. Now, another one, the time frame for recording property-to-property transfers in New South Wales. Are you able to make a comment on that one, please?
Yes, when livestock are moved onto your property, you need to record that movement in the NLIS database within 2 days.
Excellent, within 2 days. Now, a couple of other ones. So someone's asked about what's the requirement when stock are going over the border to Victoria? Is there anything different required there?
No. So we've all got, we all agree that, well, NLIS rules are the same pretty much in every state, except obviously Victoria has electronic IDs for sheep and goats down there. But if your animals are identified in accordance with the New South Wales law, for example, that's fine in Victoria.
Great, thank
you. Or
you.
Queensland or South Australia.
Thank you. And then another question here about the requirements for moving stock between properties in New South Wales.
So when stock are moved between properties, they need to be identified, they need to have an NVD with them, and the movement needs to be recorded on the NLIS database within 2 days of them getting to the new property.
Great, thank you. Now, I've just got another one here. Someone said, rookie question, how do I scan the cattle NLIS e-tags? Where do we access a scanner? Are you aware of any ways that people can borrow equipment or anything like that in New South Wales?
I think the best, if you don't want to buy a scanner or one, the best thing to do would be to get some help from your agent.
Awesome, great. Thanks, Lisa. If you do have any more questions for New South Wales, pop them in the chat and we will get them answered, even if it's not during the session today. So we might move across to ENVDs. So Emily Duncanson oversees the ENVD for Integrity Systems Company. So Emily, we might start with the cost of ENVD. Someone's wondering how much they're going to cost us.
Well, that one will be quick and easy because they're free and they will remain free.
Awesome. Now, a couple of specific ones. So can you change details on an ENVD if there are changes just before loading, such as a change in the stock number or the stock type?
You absolutely can. So the ENVD system's been designed with a fair bit of flexibility because we understand that these scenarios occur where you might have yarded 200 head and you only decide to truck 150 or the likes. So you can make changes to livestock descriptions and number of head and things like that after you've submitted an ENVD. For 48 hours after the movement date. And that at the moment is dependent on either you having internet connectivity or mobile service at the yards or your ability to update that nearby at your house or where you do have those kinds of connectivity services.
Great, well, we'll come to connectivity in a moment. Just before we do, someone's asked, what happens if the destination address is incorrect or incomplete on an ENVD?
So just like any other hard copy NVD, it's important that the destination address is correct on the LPA NVD and ENVD. You can update just as you would on paper by essentially writing that on a hard copy, or you can manually update those details in the ENVD system as well so they are correct. If you're not sure what they are, we really encourage people to find out those details from the destination themselves so that they know that the details are correct.
Great, thanks, Em. Now, obviously, yes, we all do have connectivity issues out in the country from time to time. So a lot of people have asked, can we use the ENVD without an internet connection? So can you just make a comment on connectivity and perhaps some of the plans that ISC has for the future of the ENVD?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I've mentioned a few times, at the moment we are very connectivity dependent with the current version of ENVD. However, we can print at any time. So that obviously means that consignments can be started on ENVD, and then you can print your paper copies and take them to the yards and fill in the remaining details and treat them just as you would a paper copy. However, we know that that's a big gap. We know that the majority of our users do need an offline capability of some description. And so in the next 6 to 12 months, we're taking a deep dive into those processes and transactions that happen between various participants or various handlers of LPA NVDs, and coming up with a solution or a package of solutions for that offline capability. And so that might be things like a native mobile app, it might be things like Bluetooth transfer of information, it may be SMS in certain cases at certain points where the NVD is being transferred to the next person or a third party wanting to interact with that NVD. So there's exciting things coming, and we certainly are putting the majority of our effort into servicing those users that don't have internet connectivity when they're handling LPA NVDs.
Excellent, thanks Emily. Watch this space, sounds very exciting. Now I'm conscious that we're just past the finish point, but we do still have lots of great questions. So if you're able to stay on the call, that would be great. We'll go through a few more of them now. If not, we are recording this session, and so we will provide the link in an email to you tomorrow. So we'll press on with a few more minutes worth of questions. Damon, now we might just come across to you. So just an NVD question. Someone's asked, are there any plans to add a specific grass-fed only or antibiotic-free question on the NVD? Are you able to just perhaps make a comment around the food safety aspect of NVDs?
Yeah, thanks, Dee. I think it's just to reiterate that, you know, the NVD is really a food safety document. So any elements or questions pertaining to animals' history and records about that. And obviously, when we're talking about grass-fed, grain-fed elements, we've obviously got clear programs that underpin those separately to the NVD. So the short gap, probably not, no.
Thanks, Damon. Awesome. Now, Don, we might come over to you for questions about NLIS. So we do have quite a few questions. So I'm just going to pick out perhaps a few that might apply to a number of people. So Don, someone said, if I put sheep on a neighbouring agistment property, what am I supposed to be reporting that somewhere? Are you able to just make a comment around whether we should be reporting movement of stock for agistment?
Well, technically, if you move livestock from one property to another, that's a movement that has to be recorded. If the two properties have the same pick, then obviously that doesn't need to be recorded. But I'm assuming both properties have a different pick, in which case, technically, yes, you do have to record the movement.
Great, thank you. Now, what happens, now this is a question from today, what happens if the buyer or the receiver doesn't do the transfer?
Well, Lisa Burrows is on the call. I think she would be a better person to answer that.
Lisa, are you able to perhaps take that one on? What happens if the buyer or the receiver doesn't do the transfer in New South Wales?
If the buyer or receiver doesn't do the transfer, I think the vendor should contact them and ask them when and if they're going to. If that doesn't work, because I mean they would have sent an NVD with the livestock to the new owner's place. The best thing to do otherwise is maybe talk to the agent and get them to do it, or they could actually do it themselves. But they just need to check with the agent and the buyer first, because I mean sometimes maybe the buyer's just delaying and hasn't actually completed it but intends to.
Great, thanks Lisa. And yeah, Kathleen did mention earlier about the importance of people checking those transfers, so that's a really good question. Finally, if I buy stock privately through an agent, who does the update on the NLIS database? Don or Lisa, are you able to make a comment on that one?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Jenna. So the agent can do that transfer if the buyer would like that, because the principle is that the receiver or the buyer of the livestock does that transfer. So it's up to the buyer. If the buyer can't, maybe the agent can help out there.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Good to clarify these responsibilities so everyone's aware of what they should be doing. Lisa Barrios, we might just finish with one last question to you, if we can. Now, someone's asked about audit compliance. How do livestock management software programs make audits easier? Now, obviously, ISC doesn't endorse any particular programs, but are you able to perhaps make a comment just on audits themselves? Kathleen said, don't panic, but perhaps just give people an insight as to what an audit involves and how they can be prepared for that.
Yep. So I guess the one thing I just really want to point out is from an audit perspective, there's documentation that the auditors are reviewing that are really just documents that are recording all your on-farm practices that you do on a day-to-day basis anyway. So it's just around maintaining and recording the information that is required through LPA in your animal treatments, your pasture treatments and everything else. We have a range of templates available on the website if you're unsure about what types of categories are required to be recorded in your management systems. But basically when you are conducting any management practices on farm, it's just about ticking those items off and ensuring that you're noting down all the different criteria around those treatments or records that you need to maintain. So it's nothing to be scared of, like Kathleen said, but it's just about noting the everyday management practices that you go through and reviewing that documentation at the audit.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Well, I think we'll draw the questions to a close there. I'm just conscious of everyone's time. Now, I just want to draw your attention to the chat. If you could just pop in there and click on that evaluation link, we would really love your feedback. Kathleen, before we wrap up, any final words from you?
Thanks, Dee. Thanks, everybody. The only thing from me is just a big thank you to everybody for joining us today. Conscious that you've all joined us over lunchtime. But no, thanks again to the ISC team and to New South Wales farmers and New South Wales DPI for partnering with us and providing the technical responses. And yeah, thanks everybody again. And thanks, Dee.
Great, thanks, Kathleen. So that pretty well wraps up the webinar. I would just say thanks everyone for your great questions. We've got nearly 50 in the Q&A, which is awesome. Now, if your question hasn't been answered, it will be. Just keep an eye out for that post-webinar email coming to your inbox tomorrow. We'll have a bit of a transcript of the questions that were asked today and the written response if they weren't answered verbally. Please take a couple of minutes just to give us some feedback in the chat. We would love to get your thoughts on the session. Other than that, thank you so much for your attendance. All the best for the season ahead. And we're just going to leave the webinar open just for one more minute so you can click on that chat link. But thanks everyone for your time today and good afternoon.